Alex, I've muted you, so you can unmute yourself.
Great. Is there still someone in the lobby, Clay? Looks like
there is. Lauren Glenn Davidian is having trouble joining. Let me see if I can call her. All right, well, let's get started. Just 3 minutes after 6. I think we're good to start. Good evening. My name is Clay Purvis. I'm the Director for Telecommunications and Connectivity with the state of Vermont. We're here today to talk about the 10-year telecommunications plan. We have with us tonight our consultants, Rural Innovation Strategies Incorporated. We have Matt Dunn and Alex Kelly from RISI. We've also hired CTC Energy and Technology. They're working together to produce the plan. Earlier in May, we released the public comments draft of the 10-year telecommunications plan, and we've been seeking public input on that draft. The end of this week, we will be receiving a final draft from RISI and CTC that will incorporate or at least address the comments that we've been collecting this month and last month on the plan. This hearing is the third hearing on the public comments draft. This is your opportunity to tell us what you think of the plan and make suggestions for improving the plan. Before we go to public comment tonight, Matt and Alex will give a short presentation, an overview on the plan, addressing the high-level recommendations. Once we're done with that, we'll move to the public comments section of tonight's hearing. We'll start with folks who have joined online. If you would like to make a comment, please do so by raising your hand. I don't mean actually raise your hand, but use the raise hand function at the top of your screen. We'll start with those folks, and then we'll move to anyone who might be on the phone after we've heard from everyone. I'd like to keep this to an hour if we can, but time permitting, we'll allow you to make a second comment if you would like to make a second comment. For your initial comments, please try to keep them to no more than 3 minutes. We're also accepting comments in writing, so if you want to write to us, you can send us an email to psd.telecom@vermont.gov. You can also contact Alex and Matt directly with comments, or you can go to our website and we'll put a link in the discussion. When you go to our website, you can take a survey 3-question survey that will allow you to write a longer written comment. So we're accepting comments in any of those forms. Once the final draft is produced, feel free to continue to comment on the plan. We'll leave the survey up, and we'll hold more hearings later in the month of June for you to provide additional comment. So with that, I think we're ready to begin. So I'll turn it over to Matt and Alex. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Clay. I am going to attempt to, this should work.
Great. Matt, before you begin, I do also want to inform members of the audience that we are recording tonight's session. It's already started recording, but just so you're aware of that, when you make your comment, we will be posting a link to tonight's meeting on our website after we're done with the meeting.
Great. Can folks see my presentation? I can't see anyone, so
Looks good.
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for everyone for coming out, and many of you were part of our process. Rural Innovation Strategies, Inc., and in collaboration with CTC Technologies, has spent a number of months getting input from various stakeholders, doing our own analysis, and putting together this draft 10-year telecommunication plan. Part of the process is to get input based on this plan, and I'm delighted to have folks here to participate. Let me just give you a quick rundown of what we're going to cover here. This is not meant to replace people actually reading the plan and then providing feedback on it. It's to give a high-level arc to how we approach this work, and then a general guide. We're going to start with the moment in time that we're in right now. We're going to talk about then broadband. We're going to talk about mobile service, and then public safety and PEG television as sort of the big points. So the Vermont opportunity is one that I don't think is lost on anyone here, which is that we are coming out of a pandemic where the importance of broadband has never been more clearly articulated. And with that has come a focus of funding at the federal and the state level to solve the broadband gap once and for all. And we took that to heart as we were drafting this. We did not know those kinds of resources were going to be available when we first started discussing this project. But you can't write this plan without recognizing that moment. There are currently 47,000 approximately premises in the state that lack wired 25/3 service or do not have the funding on its way to be able to deliver a faster connectivity. And so under our estimates that we have done independently, to get to those premises with 100 over 100 fiber to the home service is estimated to cost between $360 million and $440 million. The ARPA money by itself that has been allocated from the legislature presents a significant opportunity to make a dent in those in connecting those premises, and the follow-on funding that these dollars could leverage, or the follow-on funding that's anticipated from the federal government in additional funding packages could get us all the way there. The point to all this is that we are not alone in receiving this funding or seeing this urgency. States across the country are working as quickly as possible to be able to do similar kind of work. So speed is of the essence in making sure that we secure the plans as well as the human capital and fiber to begin to start deploying, so that we're not ending up at the end of the line. So in talking about broadband itself, we came to putting together this 10-year telecommunications plan with a series of principles. Despite the fact that there is this moment right now, the idea of doing a 10-year plan, given the changes of technology, is a little bit odd. I think if we had made a 10-year plan back in 2011, looking towards today, we probably would not have foreseen the adoption of community-developed fiber to the home projects that really accelerated a lot of the incredibly robust connectivity that we now are experiencing in the state, much less the models to be able to get there. So we're coming at this by looking at some principles that should guide the policy towards a 10-year plan. And the first is to invest efficiently, which is to focus on premises that are currently not served by wireline 25.3, to promote long-term resilient solutions, which means future-proof fiber to the home, and embody Vermont values, which means prioritizing community input and long-term consumer interest. So those are our three driving principles. The recent activity at the federal level, though, has not all been a simplifier in being able to deploy broadband and close the broadband gap in the state of Vermont. The RDOF subsidy that was officially awarded, I believe, in November-December timeframe, has actually complicated the Communication Union District planning process because it provided subsidy to some subsets of those communication union districts for other players to be able to deliver fiber to those locations. Second, as I mentioned before, the stimulus money is creating intense labor and materials demand, and there were already shortages in both of those. But the unpredictable construction market that's coming out of this means that an exact timeline and price is going to be hard to nail down. Third, not all CUDs are in the same place. Some have been around for a while and are actually, operating their own, broadband product to communities. Others just formed very recently, and frankly, not all communities are covered by CUDs. So in many cases, there is going to be a need for greater support for CUDs and technical assistance as they are embarking on delivering high-speed internet for their constituents, and that those resources for supporting the CUDs are just going to vary from CUD to CUD, depending on the needs and the degree of sophistication of that CUD as they've been formed. So we also wanted to incorporate the recently passed H360 as an important reflection of the current policy of the state of Vermont, and in the planning that folks should be considering as they are deploying these resources. And there is a lot of detail in 360, but there's a lot of things that are going to be left up to later decisions on how they're going to prioritize funding. And so here are the recommendations that we have. One is that funding should be prioritized for CUDs where CUDs exist, that the receipt of that funding should obligate the community union district, communications union district, to pass every on-grid premise. and that the communication union districts must apply for funding via a multi-phase approach that provides accountability and support depending on where they are in that in their maturity as an organization. We also believe that there are certain categories that are under the priorities in the legislation that some of which should be required and some should continue to be a priority or a consideration when being scored. So we believe that it should be required that the funds used are getting to the infrastructure goal of 100 over 100 megabits per second, that the plan reach all on-grid and underserved premises in that district, that they meet the safety and resiliency standards, and that they build networks that can support future public good services like mobile broadband expansion and public safety. We also think that there should be a prioritization, but not necessarily an absolute requirement to use public-private partnerships in order to ensure quality execution and operation, adhere to values that are identified as important, including issues of not having data caps or transparent pricing, and leverage asset ownership for long-term funding, as a long-term funding source for digital adoption, supported through the communication union districts. There are as I mentioned, there are some differences between what should be required under the technical standards for this funding, but there are some other things that many would like to see, but we believe should be still left to the CUDs to negotiate on a case-by-case basis. And that includes elements like open access and net neutrality, both, excellent objectives, but there is the risk of litigation and federal preemption for both of those. And we believe that CUDs will be in the best position to be able to work with potential partners on both of those to reflect the values of their existing community. There are a number of pieces to the draft plan that we think are important, but none are as important as making sure that the CUDs, as the vehicles for doing this work, have the expertise and support to ensure these long-term solutions, right? These are going to be partnerships over multiple decades. And these are not going to be simple negotiations, especially if communication union districts are working with larger incumbents as part of a public-private partnership, as many are already considering and discussing, and that those CUDs need to be equipped with the proper information and financial analysis to go into those conversations with the best possible information and make sure they make the best decisions in those partnerships for the community and for the taxpayers. So after we get through this bubble, which we're all excited to get through, of actually deploying this infrastructure, the question is what's next? And there's plenty to do that's next. And we talk a bit about the fact that there is a role for communication union districts in the long term, specifically supporting efforts to make broadband more affordable. So it's universal for people of all income levels, access to devices, and then digital skills and being able to use those tools effectively. There are some initiatives already underway, and many stakeholders, including PEG television stations and libraries and others, have a role to play in that work. But CUDs, we believe, are uniquely positioned to help do that coordination and support over the long term. So on the mobile side, we took on doing a propagation map of the current mobile coverage in our state. And I would encourage people to take a look at that map. It is telling in a variety of different ways. But the data on the right is the result of our analysis of the addresses that are covered indoor as well as covered outdoor. It is important to note that if people have high-speed internet to the home, they can use mechanisms for being able to get mobile connectivity over Wi-Fi that can address some of that, but there's still a large number of households that can't simply use mobile devices to replace broadband. There is also a note that the propagation analysis does not include a number of New Hampshire-based towers, because our data sets we were working with were the ones for the state of Vermont. And unfortunately, along the Connecticut River, it does miss a few there, but it still will give an indication of coverage in most of the state, and where there is still lacking coverage. This is a look at the roads by the class of road and how much is covered by mobile voice and data service. We feel this is important, especially when understanding safety concerns for individuals who have a vehicle emergency and are trying to call for help. And there's appears to be a lot of coverage on Class 1 roads. But when you get into other types of roads, it drops dramatically. And this is to highlight that need as we look to close the mobile broadband gap. In our recommendations are how to use resources to be able to encourage creative deployment in Vermont. We know that the FirstNet build by AT&T continues to build capacity, but if there is an interest in accelerating and making sure that there are multiple options for consumers, we believe an RFP of this kind with real dollars can actually facilitate more broadband deployment. And using a variety of criteria in that RFP, including the ability for multiple carriers on a neutral host to be able to provide connectivity, as well as other considerations along the way. On the public safety front, the clear message is that broadband expansion in general needs to adhere to the best practices for resiliency and security, because it's going to become more and more critical to responses. We do need to have better mobile broadband to make sure that there is an ability for emergency responses no matter where people are in our state. The land and mobile radio is continuing to be critical and should not be considered for replacement until other technologies can achieve better reliability. There may be room for some redundancy here, but there's still nothing that is as predictable. But the other conclusion is that actually the public safety telecommunication systems in Vermont are in pretty good shape. And so we should feel good about that while continuing to expand broadband to allow for greater redundancy and greater consumer ability to reach out for help. On the PEG TV front, we spent some time both with conversations, also reading through the Berkshire Report and spending time with the author of the Berkshire Report, which was commissioned by the Agency of Commerce and Community Development on the future of PEG television and how to make sure that it is sustainable. The top line to this is that PEG channels are crucial. And in fact are incredibly Did it just turn off suddenly?
We're back.
I can, for some reason my screen, hold on, am I still?
You're not sharing anymore, Matt.
Okay.
Can you try doing that again?
Yep. Not sure what happened. Do. Let's see if this works. Can you see the plan?
You can see it now. Yeah, you're back at the beginning.
Yep. So anyway, top line, PEG channels are crucial, and it has never been more evident than the role that access television stations played in being able to support organizations and communities through the pandemic and staying connected, civic institutions from being able to distribute content and engage more of the public that couldn't meet in person. There is also some, real concerns about funding in the long term because of the changes in technologies that are threatening traditional revenue streams. And we completely agree with all of that in the Berkshire Report. The Berkshire Report does have a number of creative recommendations, some of which are being proposed in other states. But as the author said to us himself, there is some legal risk that's associated with many of those, and there's a lot of tax analysis that was not in our scope to be able to evaluate as part of this 10-year plan. And so, we believe that Vermont can follow along with other states' attempts, and as they're successful, jump right in. But we would just advise to do so with a lot of caution because of that legal risk and tax analysis. But in the meantime, general fund support is a way to go to reflect the value that PEG stations provide to our state until there's greater clarity on some of these other solutions for longer term dedicated funding. So, Clay, that is our overview, and happy to turn it over for questions. Let me see if I can stop sharing. There we go.
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. Questions, probably not so much. With this meeting, we really want to get public comment. If you have a question, we will address the question in the plan. So if it's not clear, something's not clear, you have a question about something, we'll address it. But please do provide us your questions in the form of a comment that we can then take back and think about and respond to in the plan. We're going to go down the list. So far, I have 4 people who are interested in providing a comment. So I'll start at the top of the list and move down. We'll start with Annette Smith.
Lauren was actually first, so I'm happy to have her go first.
That's fine, Annette. You have the floor. Why don't you start? Thank you.
I'm just starting, Annette. I'm just starting at the top of the list on my screen here.
Okay. So I have reviewed the plan. My first comment is about FirstNet. I have been contacted by people in many communities in Vermont dealing with the AT&T cell tower build out, and will offer the observation that AT&T is not choosing good sites. They're having to withdraw, refile. It's not going well. But this has also brought me into some information that I think that the state should be aware of, and I actually would encourage the Commissioner of Public Service to talk to the governor about canceling the contract. First responders have contacted me about it, and they say it's extremely expensive service. And someone sent me a page of reviews. If I could give less than 0 stars, I would. Do not buy into FirstNet. Switching to this service has been an absolute nightmare. Can we say class action lawsuit? I'll send you the link to that. That's just some of them, and those are the most recent ones. But I wonder if this is a good value for the state of Vermont, and based on both Vermont's first responders who have said, well, you know, we already actually have it. Why are they building out more? And then the reality of what's happening in Vermont communities where these things are being planned. For instance, in one case, a man who agreed to lease a tower site, who then it was withdrawn by AT&T. He eventually committed suicide. And I say that because I think that this is, you know, these things have real world impacts, especially in today's climate. So I'm flagging FirstNet for you as something that I think that the administration needs to really take a serious look at, whether or not this is the right thing for Vermont at this time, especially as you say, it seems we already have good first responder service. Regarding cellular coverage, we are not going to see cellular coverage throughout the state because of our topography and terrain. They present insurmountable impediments. And I don't think it should be a priority, but beyond that, I'm aware of a lot of people who they contact me and say, where can I live that doesn't have cellular coverage because it makes me sick. And while the health issues are preempted, I still think that it's an important aspect to bring to the table that not everybody wants cell coverage. And I'm not in favor of building it out on every road in every town. What Vermont would look like if we were to do that would be something that would be aesthetically unpleasant and would create some very serious problems. I mean, I've worked with people who have had to move out of the state because of their intolerance for some of this technology. I also want to call out quality, and I think that I did a search in the plan for the word quality. And I want to highlight the quality and what has happened to our telephone service as a result of so many people going to wireless. Every day, I am disconnected from calls within a minute of getting the call. It's terrible coverage. Often sometimes the quality is so bad that I actually ask people, do you have a landline? Because it's hurting my ears. We have become, I guess, accepting of really bad cell phone coverage. And what we really need is good, high quality telephone reception, which we used to have with landlines and which we can have again with fiber optic cable. And I happen to live in the VTEL service territory that has some of the best, highest quality in the state. And I dread getting cell phone calls now. I do think that in the VTEL service territory, we have learned something that's very important for the rest of the state. And that is that for some reason, and I don't really understand why, in the transition to the fiber optic cable, which I first got in 2014, the batteries that used to be housed in the little buildings that VTEL had around are now housed in our homes. And supposedly they last 5 years. So I'm on year 7, getting close to 7 years. So, but mine is kind of high up and not in a wet place. Apparently, if your battery is in a lower down place, then or it's cold, like or damp in a basement, it's not going to last as long. So my battery's already exceeded the life. It will cost me about $25 to get a replacement battery. They're not widely available. And when my battery goes, I don't know what's going to happen, whether something's going to beep, but I do know that I'm going to have a very short window in which to replace the battery, and otherwise I will have no telephone service. And this is also an issue for people who live in utility areas that have a lot of power outages. I happen to be off grid, so it doesn't affect me so much. But for people with power outages, they're losing their phone service within 4 to 6 hours of the power going out. And this is a very serious public safety issue. And I think that the carriers, the utilities, should be required to keep the batteries maintained in the little houses and not push this infrastructure into our homes. I have noticed that wireless antennas are being deployed outside of the Section 248A process. I would like an explanation for why that's happening. And I think it's wrong. I think we either have an Act 250 or a Section 248A process, but a lot of the antennas that are, for instance, going up on schools are not being done through any regulatory process. And I think that that's wrong. I'm almost done. I noticed that the plan focuses a lot on the economic opportunities of building out broadband. And I guess now in Vermont, at least, we're using the term broadband to mean fiber optic cable. I think broadband is more of a generic term that means bandwidth, so I prefer it be discussed as fiber optic cable. But in any case, because VTEL's service territory has had this very high-speed fiber optic cable since at least 2014, I am curious what evidence there is that its availability has led to greater desirability for businesses to locate in the VTEL service territory or in areas where there is a lot of fiber optic cable of this high quality. I've also talked to you folks at the department about the need to educate people about the benefits of hardwiring computers, especially for high quality when using camera-based platforms like Zoom and GoToMeeting. And so many people's connections are cutting out, and it's because cameras use more bandwidth. And we really need to do education around it, because there's absolutely no excuse for the poor quality that we're seeing. But people need to hardwire, and it's not hard to do, but it does require some education. And finally, I would like to support all of the local access cables TV stations and assure that they are kept vibrant, because they are so critically important. And thank you. Those are my comments. You're muted.
Thank you, Annette. Appreciate the comment. All right, we're going to move next to, you know, Lauren, you keep getting pushed down when someone else wants to comment. So why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much. Lauren Glendavidian, Executive Director, CCTV Center for Media and Democracy. I have been toiling in the fields of public access television for 37 years in this June. So I've been through several iterations of the 10-year plan. My first overall comment is that this doesn't really seem like a 10-year plan. It seems like a plan, sort of a post-pandemic plan, with a kind of planning horizon, but certainly not a 10-year, a decade-long one, which I understand is hard to do in this business, but it just seems like the horizon is limited. So I'm going to offer just some particular recommendations in the area that I know something about, because the rest of the telecom plan I know a little about, but enough to be dangerous. So I'm going to just start with the PEG comments. And we really appreciate, I speak for the entire network of 25 community media centers, that PEG is included as a, you know, as a section, a meaningful section in this plan. And that is important to us, and we're very appreciative about it. I would like to just bring the recommendations of the PEG study up a level, because what's really being recommended is a rewrite and a reconsideration of the state's telecommunications tax structure, not just a public educational and government access funding solution. So, and this has been backed up by the Vermont Tax Structure Commission. Their recommendations were very similar to Berkshire's, and I think that that's just a really important point to make. I also feel like the punch is pulled here on this recommendation, because on the one hand, PEG is crucial and an essential service, but on the other hand, these recommendations that have been drafted here require extensive legal analysis. Well, of course they require legal analysis. Any action that the state takes must be examined for the vulnerability that the state may have if it advances a new kind of tax structure. But no more than any other recommendation. And it sort of worries me, the timidity or the sort of over concern that could really hamper us putting some of these ideas on the table. I will say that the one idea that is kind of given a little bit of a green light about taxing streaming services, to me, seems to be the most legally vulnerable of all of them. And actually, I think the least promising and the most vulnerable in terms of ideas that other states are doing, because in that case, you're not actually assessing the public network, you're assessing content providers' content, and that's, you know, a dubious basis upon which to base tax policy or public policy. I would not. I would urge us to look at the poll attachments. I would not be timid just because it may have some financial implication for the CUDs. The CUDs can thrive whether we put poll attachment fees on those polls or not. So anyway, I would just say, obviously I have some strong opinions here. I just think that we should be, this study should be more open to the possibilities of restructuring the telecommunications tax structure. And I do think that a central idea here is the rationalization of public benefits. And E911, which is extolled as this great public service that functions really well, is really going to suffer from the lack of revenue, just like PEG is. So we need to be looking at these public benefits as a coherent basket. And to me, that's a future-looking concept. And I think it's important to contain that in this future-looking document. I also think that this document is important because it guides the work of the department as a public advocate in administrations to come. And the core idea, the public should have access to commercial features of the cable network when talking about public access, and we should have parity and not be delegated to these digital deserts that is so often the case because cable operators don't want to spend the money or allocate the bandwidth for public purposes. It needs a strong public statement, and that statement needs to be in this document. And the statement has to say that public purposes like PEG should have technical parity with commercial services and the cable network. And also, I would submit ultimately, to the extent that we have authority, to the fiber and other public telecommunications networks. And finally, I would just say that there are a number of public applications that this broadband, this fantastic broadband network that we're all trying to build needs to reflect, and again, could be reflected in this plan. And that is a statewide public switched full bandwidth network. So the next time that we have a pandemic, we're not relying on commercial providers who, may or may not serve our public interest for education, for civic purposes, which in your survey, people are all about the civic purposes and use of broadband for civic engagement. And I think that the next generation VIT, even though it seems somewhat grandiose at the moment, is a concept that needs to be contained in a document that is meant to be 10 years. And this is actually my final statement, because many of these things I have already submitted on behalf of VAN, so you have access to this. But the final statement is, where's the public process? How come, I mean, I'm not really that special, but I didn't know these public hearings were happening. And PEG is supposed to be the AMOs, the access management organizations, helping with public process. And I just really hope that for the final draft, you get serious about reaching out to the public in the areas that the groups that are concerned about public safety and education and all the aspects that are contained in this plan, and get serious about public input, because people care. Otherwise, this whole broadband outcry wouldn't have happened. So get serious about public input. This is the second time that this plan, I mean, when the last time the department did it, there was no one at these hearings either. And it is incumbent upon the department to make sure that there is turnout to these meetings. And we can help you, but we need to know about it. So get on it. And therein ends my statement. Thank you very much.
We'll move next to Anonymous.
Steve Whitaker here. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm sure you're looking forward to it. I will try to not cover the same issues I covered last time, except for one. Still calling this the third hearing when the first hearing was not warned. No one knew about it. No one showed up. It's a farce to call that first hearing a hearing. So with regard to FirstNet and cell coverage, you relying on any one carrier for a publicly funded or supported cell infill strategy is misguided, in that we are a tourism dependent state and we do not want to say we're only open for business if you're a Verizon customer or only if you're an AT&T customer should you bother to come here. People need to speak to their friends and family and on all the networks. So that's an argument why neutral host is the only cost-effective strategy that we should be pursuing. Similarly, I've learned recently that 911 calls, if you make a 911 call from a Verizon phone and you're picked up by an AT&T tower, the calling number is not relayed to the 911 call answering location, the PSAP, which means that when that call gets disconnected or the person having the emergency needs to break and call a family member, the PSAP caller cannot call that person back because the number was not relayed with that type of missing roaming feature. Again, an argument for the neutral host. Priority of 911 call completion in the design of these community networks. These community fiber networks have become increasingly vulnerable to both fiber cuts and power outages, and to not be designing with a public safety grade resilience to assure that 911 calls go through, or conversely, or having small cell wireless coverage in the same areas, such that there is a fallback strategy to reach help in the event of a fiber cut or power outage. These are issues that really should be addressed in the plan. Requirements for diverse routes. Again, I believe we're overplaying the preemption and the fear of litigation. The FCC has been explicitly clear in their 2014 statement of policy that when it comes to 911 calling reliability, they share jurisdiction with the states. They do not preempt. And that means that every 248A application should be reviewed for diverse backhaul and backup power, extended runtime, to make sure those a single fiber cut. We had one fiber cut in South Burlington on Halloween 2 years ago, which disconnected 23 Verizon cell towers. That should not be allowed to. That should not have been allowed to happen. We do have jurisdiction based on that 911 call completion to require diverse route backhaul off a cell tower. Similarly, public safety failover. We rely on Ethernet to reach transmitting towers. I've got to challenge another statement. Public safety, we're in pretty good shape. And contrast that with Televate's analysis for Central Vermont, where they said our system is at risk of failure. Our radio system is over 30 years old and at risk of failure. So how we're being told it's in pretty good shape and therefore no design or attention has been paid in this plan is a serious question. Appropriate use of the VCOM statewide radio channels that we invested many millions, 10 or 11 or 13 million in. Earmark for Universal Service Fund is currently unnecessary for the connectivity division in light of all this federal broadband money. So while 911 is being has a shortfall, and we're still insisting on taking that connectivity fund off the top, 911 used to have a higher priority than connectivity in the fund. So that's again, these are the issues that really are supposed to be fleshed out in this plan. I'm going to quote one section from 202D. It said that in developing the plan, the department shall address each of the state telecommunications policies and goals of this title and shall assess initiatives designed to advance and make measurable progress with respect to each of those policies and goals. The assessment shall include identification of the resources required and potential sources of funding for plan implementation. That is fundamentally not in this draft. So I really think I'm going to repeat that we need to continue to push for our money's worth on this. I think I'm going to run out of time, and I will take a pause and come back after some other people have spoken because I have another 10 minutes of material.
Hey, Stephen, we'll just encourage you to submit that material in writing. Thank you. Next, we'll move to Tim and Mimi Clark.
Hi. This is the first time for me to use this system, so trying to figure it out. First of all, I agree with a lot of the comments that we've heard so far, and it actually is frightening to me to hear all the concerns that are missing from this plan. And we're just little residents in Addison County, and so it seems like there's a lot of work to be done here. But my primary concern is we want to see if the town by town fiber optic plan, we want to just see how that's fleshed out and how that compares with prioritizing with the CUDs. So if there's a town that isn't a member of a CUD, how are they going to be connected by fiber optics? How are they being prioritized, and how do the CUDs get prioritized? Do they have to compete with one another? Do they have to raise their hand? How are towns and CUDs accessing this improvement to the broadband? That's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That will be addressed in further detail in the final plan. As Matt alluded to in the beginning of his presentation, legislation was passed after this draft was issued. So the final draft will be updated with that legislation. We'll move next to Jonathan Baker.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. My son's at home and he's very active right now. So my comment relates to the section on net neutrality in the plan. And I wanted to sort of point out that in the Appendix D, there's a list of stakeholders that provided input into the plan. Listed in there are both Consolidated Communications and Starlink, who are both party to an ongoing lawsuit against the state of Vermont and Commissioner Tierney in particular, in an attempt to block net neutrality legislation from coming into effect in the state. And the section on net neutrality is, I would call the language there a little bit sheepish, a little bit deferential. And I'm just concerned that there might be a little bit of a conflict of interest there. So that would be my comment.
All right, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to give a comment? We'll move back to Cecil. Okay,
Thank you.
take it away, Cecil.
Okay, Cecile Beatty here, East Wallingford. And my concern is that there hasn't been enough inquiry in terms of some of the implications of where the problems may arise and the impact of some of these provisions. One idea that I'm not seeing a great deal of emphasis on is all of this relies on electrical power. And when you've been in VTEL land, you know that you can't count on the FIOS for electrical power. And because we don't have cell service, that's not available when we lose the internet. And the other piece of that is that the cell phones will not keep their power. And we're becoming more and more dependent on electricity in all phases of our lives. And we're not looking at, it seems, the relationship with all of that in our telecommunications. And I'm not sure who looks at that. I'm not sure who defines the relationship, but it becomes very, very serious when you have a battery, as Annette spoke of, that you don't know at what point it's going to run out. And you know that if you lose power, you have to keep shutting it off and find a way of doing that. And as you look at these big telecommunications plans, there does not seem to be an understanding that ultimately it comes down to a device and a person and power, energy of some sort. And those links need to be drawn carefully for public safety, for speed, for commerce, for all the facets of our lives in the 21st century. Thank you, and that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you very much for your comment. Would anyone else who's not spoken like to provide a comment? All right, with a minute remaining, I'll let Stephen and Lauren Glenn Davidian make any additional comments you'd like to make.
You're so kind. I have no other comments. I did want to say, Clay, that you did call me on the morning of the last hearing, so I did appreciate that heads up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I just want to point out that the last meeting, the first meeting, you're calling it the second, started late and ended early. And so to have a meeting where you're using half of it with a slide deck and then compressing all of the public comment into 20 or 25 minutes is pretty, it's never been done this way before. There were no paper copies made available despite multiple requests. So almost seems intentional to diminish the public participation. Most people can't or won't read a 160-page document on a computer screen. And to not publish any paper copies, even upon request, is quite absurd. It's self-defeating as far as the mandatory public participation, effective public participation. So under 202D, the department is empowered to require information from the carriers. I've made a recent request of the department. Did RISI or did the department on RISI's behalf make requests to the carriers of whatever information on, for instance, Shoreham's fiber build out, Otelco's fiber build out in Shoreham, or locations and available capacity for fiber for lease around the state? Those, unlike 202E, under the connectivity division, those are not voluntarily disclosed. They're mandatory, and they are not subject to non-disclosure agreements. So if we did not do that, we fundamentally crippled this draft plan from the get-go. So that I wanted to point out that distinction, because in prior years, the same request was made and the department made no requests under 202D authority to ask for information from the carriers. Post-remote isolation, it has been mentioned in Mr. Dunn's comments. If you allow the carriers to keep secret which remotes are subject to isolation by a non-diverse protected route from that host switch to that remote, you've basically made those public more vulnerable to being unable to call 911. And similarly, you've disempowered planning for a communications union district who might want to build fiber sooner on a route that would allow or provide strands for Consolidated to close that host remote vulnerability, or provide a diverse route from that remote back to that host switch. So this capitulation to overbroad secrecy and not warning the public that anyone who lives in these exchanges is prone to having their calls isolated within the exchange and not being able to call 911. That is not public advocacy. So I call that as an explicit area that should be fleshed out in the plan. Post-remote. Contingency plans to address the fiber and materials and manpower shortages or skilled labor shortages. It's clear that we do have a 2024 goal to accomplish 100 to every address in the state, and that strategy is not laid out in this draft plan. This plan addresses those without cable service, but it does not address getting customers up to fiber speeds. The Coverage Co, there's about 10 sites that were built under the Coverage Co project with solar panels, generators. Some of them had satellite phones for diverse backhaul, which of course wouldn't be suitable for 4G. But those sites are paid for and sitting, if not cannibalized by now, and those should be made available for 4G upgrades to the communities that are prepared to implement those. I guess I'm going to have to submit testimony in writing or in a verbatim transcript. I'll let you do the corrections, but I'll get more issues on the table.
Yeah, in writing would help. Thank you, Stephen. All right, would anyone else like to make a public comment? All right, well, thank you all very much for your comment. We appreciate it. If you have additional comments, please submit them to us by email. We received 4, I think, tonight already from many of you, so thank you for that. If you have any more, feel free to email us. anytime this week for inclusion in the final draft. Again, that's psd.telecom@vermont.gov. And that link is, the email address is also on our website too, if you need that. So, all right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate everything we've received tonight, and we look forward to hearing from you when we issue the final plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.